Michael Verney, it's been a bad week for the Ladies Gaelic Football Association. Now, you've been front and centre for it all. You covered the game between Cork and Galway on Sunday at Croke Park. But can you just give us your sort of understanding of how things unfolded?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a fairly challenging week to say the least, Shane, for the LGFA. And I'd say a fairly, regressive week for women's sport in general, to be honest with you, with the amount of different things that have happened. Like, if we're to start back through a timeline, then we can probably go through all the various things that happened in different detail. But the game was originally, it wasn't actually scheduled or fixed for it, but it was supposed to be on the 28th of November. So they would have in Thurles. So both semi-finals would have been on, the same weekend. And the LGFA, to kind of allow for or accommodate a couple of dual players, more than a couple actually, just 4 to 5 at Cork, they moved the game back a week. They had a fix for the LIT Gaelic grounds on for last Sunday, but obviously on the prefix that Limerick wouldn't be using the grounds, and obviously then Limerick won their All-Ireland semi-final the previous Sunday. They had outlined to the LGFA on the Thursday, even before that game, that if they won, that they would be training on the Sunday that the All-Ireland semi-final, ladies semi-final, was fixed for, and that there would have to be a venue change. So even taking this into account, the LGFA obviously knew all this, and there was obviously a high percentage chance that Limerick were going to win. So there probably should have been, I'm sure there was work going on in the background, and I believe they tried to get O'Moore Park in Portlaoise, and I think they tried to go back to Thurles again, and there were some logistical details or stewarding problems, and they couldn't get another venue, and they looked at Parnell Park. So geographically, when you're thinking of it, you're looking at Cork going to Parnell Park for an All-Ireland semi-final against Galway. So you've one county in the southwest of Ireland, and another county totally in the west of Ireland as well, travelling all the way to Dublin for an All-Ireland semi-final. It doesn't really make much sense before we even start off.
So can I, just to jump back to the whole Limerick thing, and there was a huge palaver over this as soon as that story broke, and we didn't have all the context that Limerick had gotten onto the LGFA, or that had conversations saying if we got through to the final, the venue wouldn't be available. I think, first of all, it's worth pointing out, I've no issue with Limerick keeping the venue for themselves. It's their venue, they own it, they've had it for donkey's years, they developed it. And people almost, I got the sense, people tagging me in on stuff, that they almost wanted to portray it as a sexism thing, or that one side is being looked after and the other isn't. But I think straight away, we're in a world of, I remember Liam O'Neill, who, when he was GA president there 5 or 6 years ago, and he was talking about Dublin versus the rest of the country, or big counties versus small. And he says, some people, that's life. Some people have stuff, some people don't. And you just have to get on with it. And Limerick own the venue. It's their All Ireland a week later, so everything else pales into insignificance.
100%. Like, Shane, at the end of the day, if we're training for a county final, and we're going to train at 2 o'clock on a Sunday, the same time we're going to be playing the county final, and there's any sort of a fixture fixed for St. Brennan's Park in Burr, the senior hurling team, the club team, will take precedence over that. That's club, county, that's any level. I've absolutely no issue with that. And I think any negative commentary that was directed at the Limerick Hurlers or the Limerick County Board is totally out of line. You look after your own, you look after your team. That's what the GA is all about, first and foremost.
And there's another sort of a wider topic then. You see people talking about how, underage girls, that they don't get looked after and all this, and they're told go off to another field when the men's team come onto the pitch or whatever. But I know growing up down home Bursley, if you're a young lad and you're out on the pitch, you're going to get booted off. It's not a male versus female. The senior team is nearly always going to take precedence. Whether that's right or wrong, is another thing. But that's just always the way it's going to be. I know my cousin, who was a county minor back when I would have been a young teenager, and we'd be at the bottom goals, the one closest to the road when you come into the park. And sure, he'd boot you out of the goals and you're gone. You have to go up to the top of the field. That's kind of life too. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's just kind of the law of the land, or lay the land.
Generally, club teams all around the country, or clubs all around the country, the senior hurling team, or the main adult hurling or football team, it does take precedence. At the end of the day, that's what the club is going to be judged on at the end of the year, and you want to give them the best chance of winning. And that's the same with senior inter-county teams as well. So that was messy before we started. Then the fixture ended up going to Parnell Park. Before, obviously, that fixture was played, the Cork manager, Eefy Fitzgerald, in fairness, he didn't pull any punches. He said it was ludicrous and pathetic to bring Munster and Connacht sides to a Leinster venue on the far side of the country. Very, very, very hard to argue with that, really. Like, do you know what I mean? It is very hard to argue with it. He said it was something that would never arise in the men's game. That's not acceptable. It's allowed to happen, and it showed a complete lack of respect to all involved. As a result of that, obviously Cork have a massive journey to make. The game was fixed for 1:30 on the Sunday. Realistically, they're not going to travel up on the Sunday of the game, so they had 50 separate rooms booked in the Clayton Hotel out by the airport. Incurring massive costs. Realistically, I'd say you're talking probably exceeding probably $5,000 when you take in all the 50 separate rooms, all the dinners and different foods and all that they were going to have ready for them. So that's massive in costs incurred for a team. You've no problem with those costs being incurred, and if they're coming up before an All-Ireland final, but these are needless costs, really. Like, are you telling me that you couldn't have possibly got, Ennis, Tullamore, St. Brendan's Park in Burr, Nina? There's loads of places, I'm sure. And listen,
but people would say that's not a fitting venue for an All-Ireland semi-final. So is there an element to that going on whereby it wasn't just any old pitch will do and we couldn't find one in the entirety of Ireland, but there was a sort of criteria that had to be met that would stage this game?
Not being smart with you though, Shane. I don't know how happy I'd be, genuinely, if I was playing All-Ireland semi-final in Parnell Park. Realistically, it's a lot different than a lot of other county grounds. I wouldn't be a big fan of the surface and that as well. They obviously do have lights, which is probably an added advantage maybe that some other maybe county grounds or even second county grounds don't have. But that was. The LGFA were kind of on the back foot before they started, and then obviously everything started kicking off then on Sunday morning. I obviously followed the racing pretty closely, and I think there was a going report from Punchestown around 7:30 on Sunday morning because of the potential that the track was frozen and fog might lead to the fixture being called off that day, and another inspection at 9, another inspection at 11. I'm not fully sure, and the details are a bit sketchy about when exactly Parnell Park was actually inspected. It said in an LGF statement that there was a morning inspection, which is pretty open-ended. I would have imagined that if the pitch was assessed at 9 o'clock that morning, if there was a change needed to be made, they could be on to Croke Park or whoever quite quickly. They could be on to both the teams quite quickly, and changes could be made. As it happened, the LGFA said that they contacted Croke Park at 10:20 with the view to trying to change the fixture to Croke Park, and they got the go-ahead just before 11 o'clock, and they contacted both squads. Galway obviously hadn't as far of a distance to travel as Cork had, so they were actually on the way. They were in Kinnegad at the time at 11 o'clock. Now, it's questionable why they weren't further down the road than Kinnegad, which is a good hour outside Dublin, 2.5 hours before the match started. But they were in two separate buses.
But is it? So we're talking about judging going by that you're going to arrive an hour and a half before the game. I think that's plenty, is it? Or do they have to get meals?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, just with traffic and stuff, maybe an hour and 15, hour and 20. That probably is plenty. If they'd stopped in Kinnegad along the way, I suppose you could say that they'd loosened out a small bit, and it wasn't. Didn't need to be there as early.
Yeah. 2 hour trek from Galway, you don't need to stop really. 2 hour trek from Galway, you're grand.
The venue was changed to Croke Park, but I think significantly the time was changed from 1:30 to 1 o'clock. So everybody was kind of chasing their tail at that stage. And without being smart, no more so than TG Catter, which this is kind of a big part of the story as well, is that they're obviously the competition sponsors. And they had all their gear basically ready in Parnell Park, and they had Rena Buckley and a presenter and another person there in Parnell Park, and they were actually reporting from the pitch, but all their gear was there, and the game was moved to Croke Park, so the competition sponsors were unable to air the game live on their channel, which is a big hit for them, and they've been massive supporters of the LGFA, and I know they were quite sympathetic over the fact that this happened and how late it was, and they explored every avenue. I was chatting to someone from TG Carter yesterday. They explored every avenue. There was nothing they could do. They ended up having to show a replayed match at the same time as the game was going on, which is very unfortunate for them. Particularly, it's such a big game, and even chatting to Aoife Fitzgerald after, he was there, he got to see the game, and all the players and subs and all, they were there, they were part of it. But, friends, families, girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, they weren't able to watch this game, which is a big thing for him. He actually said that his dad is in hospital at the moment, and he had organised for a TV to be brought into his ward so that he could watch the match, and all of a sudden he's watching Galway and Mayo from last year's Connacht final which, and probably checking Twitter and trying to find out what's going on, which is a bit of a disaster. And then when the game did kick off, it was supposed to kick off at 1 o'clock. It kicked off at 1:10. The Galway team only took to the pitch at 3 minutes past 1. So they had 7 minutes of a warm-up for an All-Ireland semi-final, which is, far from ideal. And particularly after travelling such a long distance. And while they started okay in the first couple of minutes, missed a couple of chances, the game was basically over after about 17 minutes when Ciarán O'Sullivan scored Cork's first goal. And then kind of things started probably kicking off even more then after. So I was obviously there covering it. We were covering it. We were in the upper deck of the Hogan, just beside the press box in Croke Park, and we were told just before the match ended that the LGFA would not be making anyone available to speak to the media after the match. Like, not being smart, I was sent there on behalf of the Irish Independent, and like a match report from me on the match will not suffice. Like, you're not sent there just to get a match report, a basic match report. That's going to be up online at 3 o'clock. You're sent there to get reaction and different comments and what do the managers think of what happened. And
the story behind the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so myself and Owen Cormacan from the Irish Examiner said we just chance going from the Hogan all the way around to the Cusack, tried to make ourselves look as important as possible, and we kind of breezed around.
That's no small task now. That was no small task.
I always found a clipboard was a good one to make yourself look as busy as possible. Yeah. Just walk around with a clipboard like that, and no one will ever. They'll ask you questions about what's going on because they think you're someone of seniority. But we got chatting to Aoife Fitzgerald, who launched a fair broadside at the LGFA, and we were chatting to Tim Rabbit as well. Now, Tim Rabbit was relatively reserved despite plenty of poking from myself and Owen, just tried to get what he actually thought of what happened. Now he subsequently opened up a bit more that evening. Aoife Fitzgerald had some great lines. He said it was a kick in the teeth for the women's game for this to happen. He just said you'd have to say this has been a negative step for ladies football, for women's sport in general. It is unacceptable. Where are we going with ladies sport if this is going to happen? Where are we going? And then Tim Rabbit kind of expanded on his views maybe later on that evening. He said that he regretted that they didn't walk off the pitch, having had such little time to prepare. The referee, he said the referee, Seamus Mulville, the minute they got on the pitch, he was basically on to them that they needed to line up, they needed to get the match started. It was said over the tannoy in Croke Park as well. Once Galway came out, they were warming up for about a minute, and it was basically, could subs please revert to the sideline and we need to get this game started or whatever, because they were afraid that if it started too late that it would run in and cause some complications with the senior game.
From your point of view, could you see all this mess happening in front of you? Like, were you fully aware of everything that was happening as the game was building up just beforehand? Obviously, you had been switched from Parnell, but did you know quite how drastic it was for the likes of Galway in 7 minutes of a warm-up?
I was there. I could physically see their warm-up, and I could actually see, one of their mentors coming out maybe a quarter to setting up cones. But it was, and I'm definitely not pouring out to myself, but it was a rush for me as well. Like, I was prepared to be in Parnell Park for 1:30, and it was kind of had me dinner ready here and all, and I was just getting ready to leave around 12:15. And then I got a message on my phone, and you're going into the city centre rather than going to Donecarney. You're under pressure. You have to park the car up at the Davin stand or wherever and make your way around and go through all the press area, and it's a little trickier. So I ended up eating me dinner in the car on the way there because I figured I wouldn't have much time to eat anything. Yeah, I was multitasking. People say men can't multitask. Like, in fairness, I was driving while the radio was on, while kind of eating my dinner at the traffic lights.
Go away. You did all that in one go.
When the car was stationary. So that was grand anyway. We kind of only really realised how difficult it was for the two managers and the players involved probably after the game. I really didn't like the fact that they tried to deny us media access to managers after, and basically, in my opinion, trying to control the narrative that was being put out there. And the LGFA put out obviously a match report, which there's a brief mention of the venue change. They put out some quotes from one of the selectors from Cork, Paddy O'Shea, I think is his name, and there was no mention made of the fiasco and the farcical nature of these scenes. And that was probably up until Sunday night, and as you know yourself, it probably got even more controversial, I suppose, the next morning then as well.
Yeah, so could we talk about that then? LGFA president Maura Hickey, she was criticised after going on Morning Ireland and talking about that their warm-up would have gone on longer if they hadn't spent so much time in the dressing room. Like, that's obviously gone down like a lead balloon. Does she have a point to some degree? Like, you talked about the cone's been put out at 1:45. Now, obviously, the players needed time to tog out and what have you. So, is any of that fair from her point of view?
Personally, I don't think so, Shane. You know when you go into a dressing room, like, it takes a good 5 or 10 minutes to get togged off, and it's not just getting togged off. You could have to strap knees, ankles. There's also taking the conditions into. You need to be have mobilization work done before you go out. You need to, like, I know if I had to do what the Galway girls was on 5 minutes and I'm gone, I probably would have pulled up in the warm up. I'd say.
Yeah, I'd be the same.
Hamstring.
Like, some people do like fitness
yeah.
band work. I don't know, like, for people who don't really see it that often on GA, because you wouldn't see it, it's all done in the dressing room. But if you watch, a lot of the time, if you watch a match on BT on a Saturday morning, they show the warm-ups in the corner on the pitch, and you'd have players using these fitness bands, moving their legs left and right, sort of trying to get that mobilisation work that you're talking about. That sort of stuff can take 5 or 10 minutes, and then a few more minutes getting rubs and all that kind of stuff. So it isn't just a case of showing up and running out onto the pitch. Some players can, but a lot can't.
They obviously had 2 buses as well, Shane, so they were all keeping social distance as well. So, like, the 2 buses aren't going to arrive at the exact same time, and people getting changed aren't going to all be ready at the exact same time as well. And it's not as if it's an All-Ireland semi-final. Like, they're not going to come out in dribs and drabs. Like, you're not going to, like, if one person is ready at 1:45, they're not going to rock out. You obviously have to keep a united front, and everybody needs to go out together. And plus, if someone had rocked out at 10-1 or something like that, they'd be wondering maybe why everyone wasn't ready at that stage, and that's just not realistic. Like, a young fella who's 18 in the bird dressing room could be ready after 5 minutes. A fella who's 34 like myself could take him 40 minutes to get ready and loosened out and everything he needs to do to get ready to try and play a match. So Marie Hickey's comments kind of went down like a bit of a lead balloon, and she also spoke of her belief that the LGFA were doing something brilliant by availing of Croke Park at short notice, while she confirmed then as well that they didn't ask the GA to consider a slight delay to the senior semi-final between Tip and Mayo. If they had, like, that would have bought Galway another 15 or 20 minutes to warm up, and just to make sure that they were starting off on a level base to Cork. Cork were already in Dublin, so they were obviously a lot closer to the venue, just had to alter things a small bit, but they definitely had a distinct advantage. And while Galway started okay after that initial 4 or 5 minute burst, like, they were hit for 2 goals, one in the 7th minute and one in the 17th minute, and essentially the All-Ireland semi-final was over at that stage.
Yeah, and do you feel that moves should have been made to make sure that the All-Ireland semi-final was pushed back a quarter of an hour? Because some people would say you can't move it because of TV scheduling, but then again, there's usually wiggle room for extra time. Now, then you could have ended up with extra time. Unlikely in all, we saw how the Tipperary Mayo game went. But there was always a situation, and would it have been the end of the world if the game was pushed back 15 and it went to extra time? Obviously it throws out schedules, but is that something that could have been done, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the big issue, Shane, is, and Sinead Burke, the Galway defender, said it was a punch in the guts, that question wasn't asked. It's almost like, I don't want to be disingenuous, but it's almost like how we were so lucky to get into Croke Park. Like, it was such a brilliant thing that we were able to get into Croke Park, and it's almost like there was no questions asked. Could things be a bit more accommodating for the players involved? And at the end of the day, it said, this was a player welfare issue, why it was moved from Parnell Park. But are you telling me it's not a player welfare issue that a team only has 7 minutes to warm up? And not being smart, but the anxiety and stress that comes with all of that. Yeah. Like, it was just a really, really kind of a bad situation, which I don't think was dealt with very well at all.
Yeah, so, like, players, male or female, should all be looked after properly. I think there's nobody who doesn't agree with that. But part of the problem then is the fact that the LGFA and the Camogie associations didn't want to join up with the GA and become under the one umbrella, and therefore, like, the GA own all of these venues, or the men's sports own all of these venues, and the ladies don't, so they're probably beholden to some degree, and they know that they're going to be playing second fiddle. So there's part of me that's like, well, every kind of men's club over the history of the GA has been built up not only by men but by women as well. I think, like, I'm sure you've got family members who were secretary, treasurer, chairwoman, whatever it was, of a certain club. So it's not simply a case of, well, men own this, so men should get first call all the time. I mean, the thing is, there are people who own stuff and people who don't, and the LGFA and Camogie Association, they didn't want to become part of the umbrella, so it's a tricky one.
No, it is very tricky. To be honest with you, as regards, women in the GAA, like they're the most efficient administrators. They're the most efficient people usually working within clubs. You know what we're like in general. It's women are far better at getting things done than men, and a lot of them have underpinned GAA clubs around the country. But you mentioned Liam O'Neill earlier. I think he said when he was leaving as GAA president that his biggest regret was that they weren't able to get the LGFA and the Camogie Association under the GAA umbrella. And I think until that happens, these things are probably always going to happen, and they're going to happen far more regularly. And that's something I think that really has to happen sooner rather than later.
But even look at like the constant, well, sorry, not constant, but regular clashes in fixtures between the LGFA and Camogie. And I remember Sarah Friday had that tweet put out last year about the clashes, and wasn't it Aisling Maloney was on about it this year as well, or was it Aisling McCarthy? Off the top of my head, I can't remember which. But like, this sort of stuff it's happening kind of across the board, even within the two codes on the ladies' side.
Yeah, and a lot of the time they're kind of at loggerheads as well, fighting over fixtures and different things like that. And a lot of the players would tell you that there's not enough communication between the two to accommodate dual players. I was chatting to Rena Buckley maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago about the situation that Cork dual players were put in as well. And the more than the GAA, I'd say maybe the demands between hurling and football now are so high that it's nearly impossible to do it at county level. It is at elite level, but it's been slowly edged out with the Breach Carteries, the Rena Buckleys. Like, they're getting fewer and fewer now, just because it's so hard. Like, you could be fixed to play on the same day for two different codes, putting you in an awful position, putting your manager in an awful position, and just putting your teammates and everything in an awful position, and basically deterring people from doing it. Like, no matter what sport we play, you should not be deterring people from taking part.
Yeah,
and things like this.
No, but at county level, one code shouldn't be held up because a couple of exceptions are playing in both codes. At club level, I think it should be accommodated for sure. But at inter-county level, you've seen it in the men and women's side. It's not really doable anymore.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying, Shane, like that. Like, if there's a potential clash, that at least one is fixed for Saturday and one is fixed for Sunday. You're given, like, Orla Dwyer had a couple of horror stories there. Was it 2 years ago where she played a game at 12, and then I think Shane Ronan picked her up and brought her to the football venue to play a football game later that day. I'm not too sure if it was league or championship. It's just those type of things. They are preventable. Like, it's always going to be difficult. I never forget, actually, Sean Ryan with Offaly togged out for Offaly in the qualifiers against Waterford in 08, and then Pat Tehan, the then Offaly chairman, packed him into the car straight after, and he drove back to Tullamore, and he came on after 20 minutes in a qualifier against Down. Like, it is like, there's definitely ways around it. Like, giving people a chance, at least play a game on a Saturday evening, then play the next day or something like that. But it's just been a bit of a disastrous week, and I don't know about you. I kind of find that these are the stories that tend to be latched on to with regards to LGFA and Camogie Association, maybe more so than the games, and that's not a good look. And how can you focus on the games when you have a lot of this, the games as much as you should, when you have a lot of this undercurrent going on in the background? This is a monthly or bi-monthly occurrence where something like this is happening. Now, this is a really high-profile case, obviously, and it's going to garner an awful lot of headlines and an awful lot of column inches. But like, they really need to get their house in order to make sure that these things are minimised as much as possible. And like, in order to be treated equally, you have to. The governing bodies need to be equal to everybody that's taking part as well. And to me, it doesn't look like that's happening. It doesn't look like it's been happening for a long time as well.
Yeah, it's regrettable. And the thing is, like, whether it's LGFA, Camogie, or the GAA and all the codes within GAA and the men's side of things, there are always kind of these negative stories. I mean, not always, but it's just as liable to happen in one as it is in the other. So it's not like we're somehow trying to portray this as a female-only type thing. It's a sort of a GAA thing. It's an amateur thing, and it's going to be recurring. And that's the thing. Like, you'd like to just focus on the sport only, and it's supposed to be 20 for 20 a year and that type of thing. But It's just so regrettable when this sort of stuff comes up, because the sport has actually been quite good to watch in a general sense. I don't get to see every single game, but like even watching the Camogie semi-finals last week, that seemed to go off fairly much without a hitch. The double header down in Parky Queeve, and it's regrettable. I mean, there's no easy solution. It's just like self-analysis of the situation.
Just a quick one on that as well, Shane, because I think a lot of people maybe that don't follow it don't know, and this sounds like it's an obvious thing for maybe me and you to say, but there's commentary coming out yesterday, saying, blaming the GAA, and this is, it is like, you can't blame the GAA, like, they're not under the one umbrella, they're blaming the GAA. I heard some commentary on the radio saying, this is a big problem for the GAA. They're not under the umbrella, and until they come under the umbrella, of the GAA, the LGFA and the Camogie Association, I just think these things are going to keep happening over and over again. At least if they're under the GAA umbrella, things can be coordinated an awful lot better between the three organisations, and they're basically all feeding from the same table rather than having maybe separate agendas.
Yeah, and to be honest, things aren't always organised brilliantly by the GAA. We're constantly giving out.
Yeah, you can sing that. Yeah,
we're constantly giving out. But anyway, it's a story that'll run and run.